Tonight, the government defends its plan to roll out the AstraZeneca vaccine after concerns are raised about its effectiveness.
AstraZeneca has its place, it will save lives, and we have plenty of it here, plenty to give 2 doses to the entire population of Australia.
More than 100 people in a Brisbane hotel forced to quarantine for another 2 weeks after 6 cases of the UK variant are discovered. The historic second impeachment of Donald Trump likely to go ahead as several Republicans say they'll vote to remove him. And the struggling arts industry calls on philanthropists to help support creatives hit hard by the pandemic. Hello, good evening. Welcome to ABC News. I'm Lorna Dunkley. With just weeks until the COVID-19 vaccine rollout begins, some medical experts have raised concerns Australia might be too reliant on one vaccine, which is less effective than others. Some individual experts have questioned whether the AstraZeneca Oxford shot is effective enough to achieve what is known as herd immunity and slow the spread of coronavirus. But the federal government and a number of medical groups have defended the choice of vaccine, saying it will save lives and that critics don't have the information available to the regulator. Medical reporter Sophie Scott has the story.
Around the world, the race is on to get COVID vaccines to as many people as possible.
The Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine is safe and effective.
But some medical experts said Australia may be too reliant on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine.
Because it does appear to have this lower efficacy, is whether or not it will lead to herd immunity, which is the prevention of transmission. So that's the sort of question.
We don't believe, based on our current data that was released by AstraZeneca at the end of December, that 62% is going to be adequate.
In the largest trial to date, that vaccine was 90% effective in volunteers who were given a low dose first, followed by a high dose. In those given 2 high doses, effectiveness was 62%. Overall, it's considered about 70% effective. But experts say those lower figures may not be enough to achieve what's known as herd immunity, when the majority of the community can resist the virus.
Would mean you'd need to vaccinate every single person in Australia with that vaccine to even get close to herd immunity.
The most vulnerable people in Australia, such as the elderly, will get the more effective Pfizer vaccine.
Looking at how we might acquire more doses of these more novel vaccines is worthwhile.
The rest will get the one developed by AstraZeneca.
I think it's essential that we all wait and see what AstraZeneca report in their latest trials.
And while there's no question about vaccine safety, some experts are worried the debate might make more people reluctant to get immunised.
We already have vaccines that have varying levels of effectiveness in them. So, for example, the flu vaccine. Seasonally, our flu vaccine may have effectiveness that could average around 50%.
The federal government says 10 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine was all it was offered by the manufacturers.
The choice is not whether one is better than the other, it's which one is available to give the maximum rollout of vaccine to save lives and to protect lives this year. And the answer to that is the one we can make here.
The federal government doesn't appear to be aiming for herd immunity in its vaccine strategy at the moment. Instead, it has as much of a vaccine as possible, which will stop people getting sick from COVID. And that's important given case numbers can change quickly, as we've seen in the last few weeks. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
Mass evacuations of a Brisbane quarantine hotel have been taking place throughout the day after a cluster of 6 people infected with the UK strain of COVID-19 were confirmed, all with links to the hotel Grand Chancellor. But it's sparked disbelief and anger among some guests, many of whom were about to finish their compulsory stays, only to be told they have to begin the 14-day quarantine period over again.
Nearly 130 people quarantining at the Hotel Grand Chancellor were looking forward to going home. Instead, they got a knock at the door from police last night.
It's very frustrating for us, being 1 hour away from release, and then we get told we live there that we're stuck here for maybe another 2 weeks.
Ambulances lined the street in a mass evacuation, taking the remaining travellers to other hotels as a precaution. But there's growing frustration and anger.
I've tested negative 4 times in 25 days. 3 tests here, 1 test pre-flight from the US. And how many times do I have to test negative to be negative?
Those being moved will no longer have to pay for their hotel quarantine, the only compensation offered.
I know that's going to be very tough on these particular guests, that they now have to do an additional 14 days. However, it is necessary.
6 cases have all been linked to a breach at the Hotel Grand Chancellor. The more contagious strain was first detected in a UK traveller and his partner on the 7th floor, who arrived on December 30th. A week later, a cleaner at the hotel tested positive to the strain, later infecting her partner. In the past 24 hours, a man and his adult daughter returning from Lebanon, housed on the same floor, also tested positive to the UK strain. All 6 cases linked by genome sequencing.
We don't have CCTV on that particular floor, so that means we have to be even more meticulous about how we go about our investigation.
The part that continues to confound authorities, how the virus jumped from the original UK couple to the cleaner and to the father and daughter from Lebanon.
Which is why I've advised the Premier this morning that I think the safest thing to do is to move all of the guests out of that hotel to other hotels immediately.
While the hotel hasn't taken any new guests since the cleaner became infected, the precautions don't end there. Hundreds of employees who worked at the hotel since December 30, as well as hundreds more who quarantined here, have all been ordered to immediately isolate.
The fact that all of these 6 people were on the 7th floor, how did it get transmitted? Was it in the air conditioning? Was it movement? Was it picking up something?
The investigation is still underway, but the Premier wants a nationwide review of procedures for people entering the country.
This is of concern. It is of national concern, not just to Queensland, but everywhere else.
Stephanie Zillman, ABC News, Brisbane.
The Australian Defence Force has confirmed this evening 2 foreign military officials who were quarantining in a hotel in Darwin have tested positive for COVID-19. Their close contacts have been sent to the Howard Springs facility. Health groups who have been warning hotel quarantine is too risky because of Darwin's vulnerable Indigenous community are tonight deeply concerned.
Tonight in Darwin, the first reported cases of COVID-19 among foreign military being quarantined at the Travelodge in the CBD. Hotel quarantine has been disastrous in some parts of the country, with the virus spreading because of quarantine bungles. The NT had avoided that by mostly using the Howard Springs Quarantine Centre on the city's outskirts. But late today, the Australian Defence Force confirmed 2 positive COVID cases in the Travelodge. One a foreign military official, the other the partner of another official. Both are now in the Royal Darwin Hospital.
It was always going to be a significant risk, and in the light of this news today, I think it's time to revisit this decision.
The cases are among a second tranche of foreign military who arrived on Monday. The Defence Force says close contacts of the cases, including family and those who arrived on the same plane, have been sent to Howard Springs to isolate. It says they had no contact with the general community. The NT government is trying to reassure the public there has been no breach of the quarantine procedures.
They need to be open and transparent because, as we've seen down south, COVID-19 is spread by some of the health workers, some of the support staff, some of the cleaners.
The Chief Minister was yesterday asked if the public would be informed about positive cases among defence personnel in hotel quarantine.
Yes, so we're always public about our cases as they develop.
Defence and the NT government confirmed the infections following questions put by the ABC this afternoon. The hotel's duty manager also told the ABC this evening he had not been informed. There's outrage among Indigenous health groups. Howard Springs hasn't been used for all foreign arrivals.
We know the virus lives in the air, inside internal buildings, so we don't want to use high-rise hotels if we can avoid it, and we can avoid it. We've got Howard Springs, so why allow this in the first place?
Meanwhile, another person from last Friday's Indian repatriation flight, a 59-year-old woman, has tested positive for COVID-19 in Howard Springs. Suwaiba Hanifi, ABC News.
Donald Trump has denied inciting the deadly riot that rocked the US Capitol and dismissed efforts to impeach him. Democrats have formally called on the Vice President to use the 25th Amendment to remove Mr. Trump from office, but Mike Pence has refused to do so. North America correspondent Catherine Diss reports from Washington.
Boarding up and bracing for trouble. The nation's capital this time getting prepared for what may lie in the days ahead. Its streets now crawling with 15,000 National Guard troops.
Pennsylvania is recognized.
Inside the House, which came under siege last week, Democrats pushed ahead with efforts to remove the president from office, pressuring his number two to invoke the 25th Amendment on grounds he's unable to lead.
I call on Vice President Pence and the Cabinet to do the right thing, to put our country before the interests of any one man.
We are calling on the Vice President to respond within 24 hours of passage.
The resolution is adopted without objection.
The resolution passed the floor, but not the second in command. In a letter to the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Vice President Mike Pence declared he doesn't think such a course of action is in the best interest of our nation or consistent with our Constitution. Impeachment's next. The Democrats want the president gone and gone for good, but getting the numbers in the Senate is a high bar. A two-thirds majority is needed to convict Donald Trump and another vote required to ban him from ever holding office again.
As a member of Congress,
at least 3 Republicans are pledging to vote in favour. And according to the New York Times, even the most powerful man in the Senate, Mitch McConnell.
It's really a continuation of the greatest witch hunt in the history of politics. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. This impeachment is causing tremendous anger.
Blunted by social media giants in recent days, the president's made his first public appearance since the Capitol siege, touring his much-touted border wall in Texas with a message for Joe Biden.
As the expression goes, be careful what you wish for.
There are now more US troops in Washington, D.C. for Joe Biden's inauguration than currently in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. A stark reminder of the threat America's own citizens pose to the incoming administration. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Washington.
An Australian man is behind bars in Germany, accused of running the biggest illegal online marketplace in the world. The 34-year-old, originally from Queensland, allegedly used dark market to sell illegal drugs and stolen credit card data.
A German military bunker once used to protect turned shelter for criminals seeking to exploit, namely to sell drugs online. 2 years ago, the lid was lifted, 8 people were arrested, and it sparked a massive investigation.
We have the third highest in the world rate of usage for people using the darknet to acquire illicit drugs.
Demand allegedly met by Australian man Julian Kelly. The 34-year-old, originally from Queensland, was arrested in a small town in Germany's northwest, accused of running Dark Market, the world's biggest of its kind. With 500,000 users, authorities say the site is worth almost $500 million.
But overwhelmingly illicit drugs would have been the main category of items for sale on this site,
as well as stolen credit cards, SIM cards and malware used by hackers. The dark web is an encrypted version of the internet. It's accessed by downloading free software. Once using that specialised software, a user's identity and location are masked. And it opens them up to global marketplaces which can be searched using hidden browsers similar to Safari or Chrome. The most common items for sale are legal drugs and weapons, often bought using virtual currency like Bitcoin.
Now, this is a growing trend. The pandemic has really exacerbated and seen a significant increase in this.
Australian Federal Police wouldn't comment on this latest arrest other than to say they're providing support to their German counterparts. Going forward, cyber experts are concerned more lockdowns as a result of the coronavirus will only turn more people to the dark web.
And once people have learned these new skills, they've learned safer ways to conduct criminal activity, buying and selling drugs, for example, then they're going to continue doing that.
Another crisis partly fueled by the pandemic. Mark Reddy, ABC News.
There's been 2 rescue efforts on Victoria's Mornington Peninsula late today. A man in his 80s has died after being pulled unconscious from the bay at Tootgarook. And a dramatic incident on the other side of the peninsula sparked a mass rescue operation. A woman has died and 5 others were pulled from the water at Bushrangers Bay. Police say 4 people were swept off rocks at about 3:30. 2 members of the public jumped in to help, but they got into trouble. Life-Saving Victoria says all were pulled out of the water. The surviving 5 people have been taken to hospital. After a land and air search lasting nearly 24 hours, a 47-year-old man has been arrested over the death of another man in northern Tasmania. Emergency services were called to Reedy Marsh, west of Launceston, last night after a 69-year-old man had been killed and his wife injured. 3 people were promptly taken into custody for questioning, but a 4th went on the run.
The normally quiet Reedy Marsh was a hive of activity last night, with the discovery of the body of a 69-year-old man inside his home on Larkham's Road. It sparked a large-scale police manhunt. Locals were told to secure their properties and be on the lookout for a man considered dangerous.
Bit of an uneasy feeling, yeah. Not nice, obviously. We had to think about closing doors and locking them, which we never do at night when we're home.
On foot and armed, the 47-year-old was described as being a skilled bushman, wearing camouflage clothing and with camouflage paint on his face. Police were this afternoon preparing to bring in tracking dogs from Victoria when, just before 4 p.m, a breakthrough.
The person was arrested without incident, arrested by members of the Special Operations Group, and was the result of significant police resources being deployed to the area.
He'd been spotted by people in Parkham, north of Reedy Creek this morning, with police taking to social media a warning he was armed and not to approach.
He was in possession of the knife. He didn't use the knife against police, but he was in possession of a knife at the time of the arrest.
Helicopters and drones assisted in the search, a drone pinpointing his location this afternoon.
The drone operators observed him moving to or appearing to move towards an outbuilding, and he obviously was aware that he had been seen. He then made moving back toward bushland where he's more comfortable.
He's now in police custody and will be questioned tonight. Mr Gerard wasn't the only arrest. Last night police took 2 men and a woman, all from Launceston, into custody over the incident. They've all now been released without charge. Police say how the 2 men are known to each other is part of the ongoing investigation, but they have confirmed it's an isolated incident and that there's no threat to the safety of others. The 69-year-old victim's wife has been released from hospital, recovering from minor lacerations. Jessica Moran, ABC News.
Police are offering a $1 million reward to help solve the cold case murder of a Victorian grandmother more than 30 years ago. Kathleen Severino was 70 years old when she was bashed to death in her Drummond Street home in Ballarat on New Year's Eve in 1987. She suffered fatal head injuries during what police believe was a burglary gone wrong. Her daughter discovered her body the following day.
33 years later. There are people out there that know something. How they can live with themselves, I don't know.
It's a long time. However, I'm sure that people that know of this crime would not have forgotten about it because it was such a horrific crime.
A man was charged in 1990, but the case against him fell apart and he has since died. Anyone with information is being urged to call Crime Stoppers. Farmers near Lucindale in South Australia have begun the difficult task of destroying livestock and mending fences after Monday's significant grass fire. Police say charges are unlikely over the burn-off suspected of starting the blaze, and a warning: this story from Sarah Mullins contains images of dead livestock.
When the bushfire approached Sam Copping's home, he took his most valuable possessions and went to help the firefight.
We've got a few photo album books that my late wife compiled, and her ashes, and that's all I grabbed.
Now he's already begun the task of rebuilding.
The destruction of livestock and clearing fences, it's going to be tough, but we're a pretty resilient community here, all band together.
that livestock destruction is already underway. Thousands of sheep perished, many others are being euthanased.
We can put fences back up, we can rebuild sheds, but stock's hard to replace, and there's that additional emotional trauma with live animals.
The fire began on a private property but was not deliberately lit. Investigators believe it was a months-old burn-off that rekindled.
There are reports that can happen up to 6 months, that the fire is still hot enough underground to pop up. It could be that the fire is burning along a root line of a tree underground without anyone being aware.
That's reassuring that it wasn't deliberately lit, especially for the people of that community to think that they weren't being targeted by somebody.
While firefighters continue to keep an eye on hotspots, crews got to work on hundreds of metres of down power lines. More than 2,000 customers entered their third day without electricity today, including residents here in Kingston. But SA Power Networks is hoping most homes and businesses will have their power restored by midnight tonight. This fish and chip shop got its power back yesterday, averting disaster in its live lobster tanks.
Tuesday we had to shut because without the lights and all the freezers and that, we couldn't afford to open them.
Crisis averted, but for many others, it's a tough road ahead. Sarah Mullins, ABC News, Kingston South East.
Few industries have been crushed by COVID like the arts, but the Sydney Festival has just received its single biggest gift from an individual, $5 million, and the donor wants other wealthy Australians to dig deep too.
Priceless views and deep pockets. Peter Friedman made his money in the microphone game, and now he's using it to amplify the arts.
You got to give. That's what I was taught, that to he who much is given, much is expected, and so this is what I want to do.
His $5 million gift is the single largest donation from an individual in the Sydney Festival's history and is sorely needed in a year the arts industry has been decimated by COVID-19.
If you look at Australian artists right now, they can't tour internationally, let alone interstate. And so I know that this gift will do much to help the Sydney Festival commission new Australian stories.
While the sector's been pleading for more funding from the government, festival organisers say philanthropy has been a lifeline.
What I've loved in this last 12-month period is to watch philanthropists really step up. We've seen people kind of double their philanthropic gift outside of Peter Freeman's amazing offer, but to see so many people saying, actually, I want to make sure that something else can happen.
The businessman says philanthropy is the lifeblood of the arts in America, and he'd like to see more of it here.
Those who have the money and haven't thought of it, please do something, no matter how big or small. Every dollar, every 500,000, it's all going to help.
Artists couldn't agree more, but say more private money shouldn't give governments ideas about cutting public funding.
We certainly don't want any less government funding in the arts, and we would absolutely love more. We need more. As I said, I can't tell you how many artists have done it tough in the last 12 months as a result of COVID.
And there's still plenty of tough times ahead. Sarah Gerrithy, ABC News, Sydney.
Indian cricket bosses have been forced to intervene, with players complaining about the conditions in hotel quarantine ahead of the fourth test at the Gabba. COVID restrictions have confined the tourists to a five-star hotel in Brisbane, alongside the Australian team and match officials.
The Australians have returned to their fortress for the series decider. They haven't lost a test in Brisbane since the late 1980s.
There's no one in the Australian cricket team who doesn't like playing cricket at the Gabba.
But the conditions away from the ground are unprecedented, with both teams confined to this city hotel due to COVID. It's closed to the public to give the players a little more freedom in quarantine, also a chance to recover after a tough slog in Sydney.
Out of 99 test matches, it's the first time I've ever done an ice bath after a game.
It's all good. We're ready to go. It's all fine.
The tourists aren't so settled, with players complaining to local Indian media they were locked in their rooms, had to make their own beds, clean their toilets. They also couldn't use the swimming pool or gym. Indian officials reportedly cleared up the concerns with Cricket Australia. They'd been reluctant to travel to Brisbane in the first place due to the tough quarantine protocols.
The distractions are just part of the theatre and the drama of Test cricket. It is now, and it always has been.
Tim Payne's theatrics during the drawn third Test had been widely criticised.
At least my teammates like me, dickhead.
But he retains the full support of coach Justin Langer.
He had a frustrating day. We've got to cut him some slack, surely.
And Langer says he's been baffled by claims Steve Smith deliberately scuffed Richard Pant's batting guard marks on the Tent's final day in Sydney.
We're just really disappointed with everyone coming out and saying the things about Smithy, because none of it's true.
Opener Will Pukowski was restricted to lighter duties at training today. A call is yet to be made whether he'll play after injuring his shoulder in Sydney. Marcus Harris is his likely replacement. Brittany Klein, ABC News, Brisbane.
Melbourne Formula One chiefs have defended the postponement of the Australian Grand Prix, saying it wasn't logistically possible for teams to quarantine. The race is, of course, usually held in Melbourne in March, but has been rescheduled for November because of the coronavirus pandemic. Organisers say, unlike the tennis, it isn't feasible for up to 1,600 people to go into hotel quarantine at the very start of the busy F1 season.
When you look at the arrangements of setting up very, very big businesses, big organisations, and the logistics and also the challenges that they face coming into a new season, it wasn't possible to have them operate in a strict quarantine arrangement.
The 2020 Grand Prix was cancelled at the last minute after a McLaren team member tested positive to COVID-19. Australian rider Toby Price's bid for a third Dakar Rally title is over after he crashed out on the race's 9th stage in Saudi Arabia. Price started the day second overall in the bikes category before he crashed about 155 kilometres into the gruelling stage. A number of other riders stopped to help Price, who was found dazed, lying in a riverbed. He was flown to hospital with scans revealing a broken collarbone.
It's something that we have to think about every time we put gear on. Every morning, it could be it, and this day last year, we lost a really good friend, Paulo, and today Toby crashed and went out of the rally, but he's going to be okay.
It is just the second time the 33-year-old has failed to finish Dakar in 7 attempts. He broke his leg in 2017. Let's take a look at the weather forecast now. Here's Graham Creed.
We've got a real mix of conditions across the nation as we move through Thursday. Still the potential of some isolated heavy falls about the northeast tropics, but generally that rainfall will gradually contract to just the peninsula. We've got a front moving through Tasmania that's going to bring widespread showers about the west and south of the state. Some gusty winds and possible hail with thunderstorms developing through parts of eastern and central New South Wales. Heat continuing across central parts of Western Australia, the Northern Territory into Queensland and northern New South Wales. The possibility of damaging winds, particularly in the early part of the morning for the ranges in behind Perth. That's anywhere from about Gin through to Busselton.
Graham, thank you. I'm Lorna Dunkley. Thanks for your company this evening. Stay with us. 7:30 is next, followed by The World.